Hi, I'm Andrew Shovlin, Trackside Engineering Director, and I'm here to answer your questions from the Russian Grand Prix. So an interesting race, especially for us on the pit wall. Both drivers did a great job in qualifying. Valtteri getting that pole position and Lewis helping us secure the front row lockout. They both had a good start as well. It's difficult in Sochi because it's such a long run down to that turn 2, but they were able to use the slipstream, retain the lead, and we were able to go into the first stint in first and second place. Further down the grid you had Verstappen starting on the soft tyre, and that became quite critical for our race because the soft was the best tyre that Pirelli had brought there, and it meant that Valtteri on the ultra soft that was degrading wasn't going to be able to get enough of a gap to stop and come out ahead. So we had to box Valtteri behind Verstappen. We were then debating the right lap to bring Lewis in, yet Ferrari took the initiative there. They were able to stop Vettel, they undercut us and came out in front. So that wasn't looking great for the Drivers' Championship, but Lewis made a fantastic overtaking manoeuvre, able to retake the position from Vettel and then put himself ahead in terms of points. Lewis, though, pushing his tyres really hard at that point of the race, had caused the rear tyres to blister. And as we saw the cars bunching up, with Verstappen at the front of the queue, Vettel at the back, we were concerned that with Lewis's tyre condition, Vettel might be able to make a pass work on him. And that was what drove our decision to invert the cars. So in effect, we were guaranteeing a 1-2 for the team, rather than risking a 1-3 and a significant loss in the Drivers' Championship. So first question from Mac on Instagram, asking about the hesitations that Lewis had mentioned on the radio with his power unit. Well, this isn't really a concern. Things like this are normally down to small issues with the mapping of the engine. There's certainly no concern about the hardware or whether there'll be any issue going forward. But it is an area that we'll look at ahead of Suzuka. We're going to be there next week, and we'll just make sure that we get on top of it and can give him a nice smooth power delivery. And the next question's from Jan on Instagram, asking about what went wrong with Lewis's overcut. Why didn't we bring him in a lap earlier? Well, when Valtteri boxed, Lewis was able to find some pace now that he was in free air. And you saw he was going quite a bit quicker, about 0.6 of a second he was able to find. And this is what we thought might help us clear some space. We'd see whether we could even clear Verstappen. Unfortunately, though, with pushing the tyres hard, the ultra soft started to open up. It's not a very strong tyre. So at the point he was making progress, we then started to suffer that degradation. And it's true that we should have come in a lap earlier. Ferrari took advantage of that. They brought Vettel in. They were able to undercut us. So it didn't go to plan. We didn't do what we should have done, but it's something that we'll look at ahead of the next race. Next question's from Ben on Facebook, asking whether we considered pitting Lewis first. Well, we considered most things, to be honest. Every lap we're talking about what to do with the cars. Tied in with the previous question, the thing was we didn't know how fast Lewis was going to be able to go when he was in free air. We didn't know how many laps the Ultrasoft would be able to push for. So that was one of the reasons that we didn't want to bring him in, because we knew that he would then be boxed up behind Verstappen and that would make us vulnerable to the Ferrari. So that was the main, or one of the driving factors as to why we thought we'd bring Valtteri in first. And also Valtteri had that track position anyway, being further up the road. So we could be pretty certain that Valtteri would be ahead of Vettel when they stopped. Mohammed on Instagram has asked a question about how bad was Lewis's blistering when trying to pass Sebastian. Well, it was a bit of a concern. You could see on television there was a line around the middle of the tyre. It can be much worse than that. But the issue is when you push the tyres really hard early in their life, they've got a lot of grip and they've got a lot of rubber. And that's what makes it so vulnerable to that blistering. The problem is that you don't know until much later in the stint, when the tyres warm down, how much of a problem you've actually created. And that's the issue. So at the time, it would have been a small loss of grip. But what we were concerned about was later on, it would become a much bigger problem for him and may have made him very vulnerable end of race. And we have a question from Glenn on Twitter asking about how much of a threat was Sebastian really going to pose to Lewis in the race. Well, there were a few things that we weren't certain about. One was how fast Ferrari would be on that soft tyre. What we had seen in the first stint was that it was very, very difficult to build any kind of a gap to them. So we knew that they were quick. The other thing that concerned us was once everyone was behind Verstappen was this bunching effect. There was nothing that was going to bring Verstappen in. He was staying out. He would have benefited from a safety car. And we were concerned that all the cars would start to bunch together, and in that situation it can get a bit messy. Sebastian may well have made a move that could have stuck. So it were those sorts of things that are very difficult to calculate, but certainly something that we were concerned about. And we have a question from Matthew on Twitter asking about the developments that we put on the car this weekend. Did they work? How much were they actually worth? Well, yes, they did work. Actually, we've had a pretty good development program on this car, but we've got the same issue as every other team. We're not only developing the car that we're racing today, we're having to develop the car that we're going to race next year. And that balance is quite difficult to strike, especially when you're in a championship fight as we are with Ferrari. But we're not going to say how much it's worth because that would be giving away too much information. But those developments have been having a good effect. You can see that we've pulled a small qualifying advantage to Ferrari in recent races, and we're hoping that we can carry that through to the remaining races this year. So thank you everyone for all of your questions. We'll be back next week to answer more from the Japanese Grand Prix.